Welcome to the Chronological Christie podcast, in which a longtime Agatha Christie collector and her Christie novice husband discuss the works of the Queen of Crime in publication order. In this bonus episode, we are taking a look at the recently uncovered American Hercule Poirot TV pilot and several episodes of the French comedy police TV series Les Petits Meurtres de Agatha Christie. And I apologize to any ears I hurt with my pronunciation.
Welcome to the Chronological Christie podcast. We are your hosts.
Gillian Porter, a longtime Agatha Christie reader and collector.
And her husband, Alan Porter, who after almost 40 years of sharing a house with Agatha Christie books, has decided he should read them. And watch the TV shows too, apparently. Okay, we're going to kick things off with the lost TV pilot for a 1960s Hercule Poirot show. The disappearance of Mr. Davenham was made as a pilot for a series that did not happen. It was directed by John Bram and starred Martin Gabel as Poirot, and it is now available to watch on YouTube. The episode was later reused as an episode of the General Electric Theatre in 1962 with an opening host segment by Ronald Reagan. This airing marked the debut of Poirot on English language television. So the pilot was fun. I was pleasantly surprised actually by just how good and enjoyable it was. It was well written and directed, and the changes made to make it work for an American audience of the early 60s was still respectful to the source material, surprisingly. Martin Gabel was excellent as this incarnation of Poirot, just eccentric enough without being over the top. It's still relatable enough to work well within the confines of a TV show designed for an American audience. I love the fact that he stayed in character for the follow-up sales pitch too, which is actually also on the YouTube, where he highlighted just how big Agatha Christie's audience was and the sheer number of stories that the proposed series could tap into for material. Within the story itself, Poirot's tricked-out car was a nice touch, and the TV coverage of his arrival at the hotel where he was meeting Mrs. Davenham was a good way to front-load all the necessary exposition. I thought it was an interesting choice for a pilot episode, probably due to budgetary reasons, as with it being mainly Poirot sat in his hotel room or suite, it would require the minimum of sets and no on-location stuff for the rest of the cast, which was actually just 5 actors. It felt like more, but it was only thinking back and counting them, I realised there was just 5 people in it. And I think to some extent that might have been its downfall as well, because I recall that the first pilot for Star Trek was rejected because the network thought it was, quote, too cerebral. And here the premise of the whole thing is exactly that. It's a very cerebral show. Maybe it just needed more action and people running around for it to be appreciated for American TV audiences of the time. It's a shame it never happened, because I tell you, I would happily watch a series based solely on this pilot. I thought it was great. What about you, Jill? What did you think of this pilot for a Poirot series from the 60s?
Same as you. I'm kind of sad it didn't get taken up for a series, as I thought it was really good. It was faithful to the source material. It was well acted. Like you saying, maybe not exciting enough for American audiences or American producers and people that decide whether it's exciting enough for American audiences. And that's a shame. As like you, I thought Martin Gabel played Poirot really well, and I appreciated the twist of his not leaving the suite and working out from there as he did in the original short story. Also taking a bet from the 2 police officers who thought he was bonkers, couldn't understand why Mrs. Davenham had employed him, obviously not well known in America at the time. And I thought that was all done very well. I thought it was a really solid episode. You know, they kept it really faithful to the source material, which was great. I wasn't too sure about him using brandy to clean his eyeglass, though, because if he actually got that too close to his eye, wouldn't it sting? I mean, if you put your glasses on, they're never going to touch your eyes, really, with the way they're made. But with an eyeglass like that, just made me wonder anyway. But like you, I loved the car with the TV, the phone and the bar. As much as Poirot did himself, he was obviously enjoying watching Westerns on the TV, which was funny. And I thought it was clever how that moved on to showing the TV coverage of all their arrivals at the hotel. You know, all the press seemed to know. and he was watching that as it was happening, which I also thought was quite clever. I thought it was a really solid episode. You know, we could have had a whole series of these, and I thought that would have been wonderful because I thought he was great, like you. I think that was a real shame myself.
Yeah, one of the things I didn't touch on, which sort of just popped back in my mind, was in that pitch he did at the end. He said that the intent of the show was to make sure that like Agatha Christie's books, that all the clues were there for the audience to see, and that they would present all the clues so you could work it out as you went along. And I thought that was neat because a lot of TV stuff was, does become suddenly everybody knows things that they shouldn't necessarily have known, or things like that. And I like the fact that he actually made that point. That was the thing they were going to do with the show, was make it so the audience could figure it out themselves and be presented with all the same clues that Poirot had seen, which I thought was nice. Again, shame it didn't happen.
Yeah. And the other thing I was going to say is I would be curious, because if it had got taken up, this was a 30-minute episode. You could do all the short stories in 30 minutes, but I'm not really quite sure you could do a lot of the novels in 30 minutes without gutting the heart of the story. So that would have been quite interesting to see. There's
like 50 Poirot short stories.
Yeah, I mean, they could have quite happily gone along with those and it would have been fine. And it would have meant some of them wouldn't have had to been quite as creative as the David Suchet Poirot series, where they made them all about an hour. They wouldn't have had to be as creative as that with just fitting into half an hour. But it just made me wonder, if they did go on to do novels, which ones could you fit into half an hour?
Yeah. Or would you do a two-parter, to be continued?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. So, yeah, that would make sense.
Yeah, it was very interesting. Shame it didn't happen.
Yeah, go watch it. It's on YouTube. The link for it will be in our show notes.
We'll now zip across the Atlantic from the US to France and take a look at Les Petits Meurtres de Agatha Christie. Again, apologies for our bad French. It's a long time since we've spoken French on a regular basis. Probably say from those accents, it sounds like you've never spoken French, but we did many years ago.
I could speak it fluently at one point. This is really sad that I can't now.
As we only recently discovered this series was available on Kanopy, the library app, we thought we'd take a look at the episodes related to stories that we've already covered. The ones we're covering in this episode are from season 2, which was titled Agatha Christie's Criminal Games. It's interesting that each season of the show had a different title, and we're set in different time periods. And this season 2 was set in the late 1950s and early 1960s. For some reason, Kanopy has that single season split over 4 smaller seasons. So if you're looking for the shows on Kanopy, you'll see it's got 4 seasons. You have to sort of go through them and find the ones you want. And we're going to start off with the first story, The Mysterious Affair at Styles, which in the original French series is season 2, episode 15, but on Kanopy is season 3, episode 1. Synopsis: a lady comes to see Inspector Lawrence, the hero of the series, in distress because the owner of a popular beauty spa she manages has married a much younger man. Lawrence is unwilling to get involved, but his secretary Marlene persuades Avril, her friend and who is a reporter for the local newspaper, to visit the spa. They do so, but are mistaken for a lesbian couple. While there, Marlene finds a man's body at the bottom of the swimming pool, murdered. Inspector Lawrence arrives at the spa to investigate. During the investigation, Avril discovers that the spa's owner, Emily, is actually Avril's own mother, who abandoned her at birth. Shortly afterwards, Emily also dies, which is clearly a second murder. Lawrence's investigation into both murders turns up strange happenings, such as Emily's habit of drinking the blood of children, a surrogate pregnancy of one of the spa staff who Emily recently adopted and wrote into her will, and the alluring wife of a government minister who sedated Emily to cover up her own affair with Emily's husband. Oh, that sounds all very complicated.
So what
do we think of it, Jill? What did you think of this French take inspired by Agatha Christie? I wouldn't call them adaptations, but what did you think of it?
Well, reading that, you'd think, gosh, what a mess. There's all sorts of weird things in that, but I enjoyed it. I love the stylized set, great cars, great clothes, and it had just the right touch of humor. The story was a little jumbled, rather telegraphed at times, but I don't necessarily feel that took away from the enjoyment of it all, because basically the most enjoyment I had was the 3 of them, Inspector Lawrence, Marlene, and Alice Avril. interacting with each other. They are the most fun. There was an awful lot going on, as I'd said, and sadly, I don't feel we were given all the information we needed to work out everything. So this was not like the American TV pilot. They weren't making any promises on that. Who the murderers were was never in question. Well, I was hoping, I will say, I was watching this because I was hoping they didn't make that change. But why the journalist was murdered was rather opaque until Marlene got through all the magazines Laurence had given her to check out. And I don't know, it's like they changed the strychnine concoction to tablets instead of a tonic as a last dose and made it so that what her much younger, very attractive husband, who seemed to be sleeping with every woman at the bar, was massaging her with oil with strychnine in it every night. So it was gradually building up in her body. But I felt that failed a bit because they didn't explain how that didn't kill her until she was given a sleeping draft by the government minister's wife that apparently interacted with the strychnine and killed her. But we didn't know that until the very, very, very end. So there was a lot of times where I was like, well, I know according to the story, it's meant to be these two people, but how are we going to get there? And I feel like some of those steps in the story were missed, but it didn't stop me enjoying it because the interaction with those three is great. You know, unless I blacked out through part of that and I missed that explanation, I don't know. But I did also love the fact that while all the women were fighting aging by going to this spa that looked very nice, I will say, at Styles, Inspector Laurence was also doing the same thing as he had just had a big birthday. We don't know which one it is, but was updating his outfits in an effort to look younger. And everybody noticed, but it was interesting that the comments of the pathologist, who was a man, and Lawrence's boss about his clothes, those were quite entertaining because they, you know, the women were like, oh, you look nice or whatever. Or Marlene was like, why aren't you wearing a tie? Whereas the men were like, what are you wearing that for? Especially as boss. And I was going to say, Lawrence didn't seem bothered about having affairs with suspects either. He seems pretty lackadaisical about all that. Fair enough. But looking forward to watching more. I thought it was entertaining. The acting was well done. The sets were great. What about you, Alan?
Just your comment about his boss. I love that remark when he walked in and Laurent was wearing basically chinos and a polo shirt, and his boss is like, where's your suit? You look like a golfer. A nice little observation. Like you said, this was fun and stylish. Great 1960s French vibe with the cool clothes, the cars, and so forth. Very well directed, a design with nice, bright cinematography. Great vibe to it. Very well acted by an excellent cast. Some witty dialogue. According to the subtitles and our rusty French that we could understand, really enjoyed some of the back and forth. The subtitles weren't exactly 100% on, but some of it we got, or I got, and I think Jill did, through the actual French behind the subtitles as well.
Can I say something?
Yeah, sure.
Some of them almost made me laugh because you're like, that's not what he said.
Yes. Yeah, I think some of them were sanitized a little bit. A
little bit. Yes, definitely.
Yeah. As I sort of hinted at earlier, these are not really adaptations. It's sort of inspired by rather than a straight adaptation. And in doing that, I think it worked well in transferring the basics of the story to a different locale and a different time frame with different characters. I thought having Styles be a trendy health spa was a really fun idea. As Jill said, it looked fantastic. Not one for spas, but that's a place, if it was a hotel, I'd love to go visit that. That looked very cool. And knowing the basics of the source material made it pretty obvious who the killers were, but I couldn't work out why the murder of the journalist, not Avril, but at the beginning, the guy found in the swimming pool was a journalist, why that had been added. And he seemed to get forgotten about at times. That was sort of a setup. And then once they got into the meat of the story, it seemed to be they'd forgotten they'd actually killed this guy off until and then he'd get mentioned occasionally. And the run up to the murder of the matriarchal spa owner, Emily, took some time to get there because we knew she was going to die because we know the basics of the story. And it's like, when are they going? It seemed a long time compared to the source material where she dies very quickly. Here it was like, I don't know, probably a third of the way through, probably, or even halfway through before she gets bumped off. And that seemed to take a while. But the story worked well on the whole. Some of it was way on the nose, especially having Emily turn out to be the long-lost mother of the reporter Alice Avril, who was also missing a few important clues, as Jill said, along the way to actually help you solve the murder. as they were just sort of revealed at the end. But I think that's a minor quibble, to be honest, as in general, I was drawn along by the story. It seemed to fly by. I mean, they're an hour and a half, and it didn't seem like that at all. At first, I felt Inspector Lawrence was being played a bit too prickly and rude, but his character became softer and more relatable, especially with him going through the midlife crisis, changing his clothes, etc. And his dialogue with and general acceptance of the new pathologist was also fun to watch. As we came in partway through the series with this one, I was a little worried that we might be lost as to who these people were and their relationships. But that didn't happen at all, which is a sign of good writing and a good show, that you can jump into it at any point and immediately understand who everybody is and what their relationships are. So I like that. Like Jill, I'm looking forward to watching more of these. And before we discuss 2 more episodes, we want to take a quick break to remind you about our Patreon account, where you can get early access to our podcasts, as well as our new Patreon-exclusive Agatha-adjacent podcast series. Patreon subscribers will also get the opportunity to submit questions for our future Q&A episodes like this one. It's a quick and easy to join our growing Patreon community, starting at the Greenway level for just $5 a month. Think about all that extra Agatha goodness just for the price of a cup of coffee. You can check it out and subscribe at patreon.com/Chronological Christie. Thanks for your support.
Our next episode is The Man in the Brown Suit, Series 2, Episode 17, but on Kanopy it is Series 3, Episode 3. I didn't find any synopsis for this episode. And I also didn't find this one as good as the Styles one. The actual mystery of who the Colonel was rather unfathomable, as I suppose it was meant to be, but there just wasn't enough clues. It wasn't like you could try and work it out as you went along, I didn't feel. There were just too many people moving about to really understand anything. It just came across as they're moving here, and nothing actually seemed to be related, which is interesting as this is a later episode. So I was quite surprised by that. So it all kicks off when the current secretary, Nadine, is murdered, and she turns up at Inspector Lawrence's house because they used to be in the resistance together. So that was quite interesting. So the inspector decides he's going to act as the new secretary, Brigitte. They do a whole thing in the series where it looks like he's dying in hospital while he's doing this. And it was so much fun to watch him change his posture, his personality, and everything. And it made the investigation a bit more fun, because up till then it was just a little bit confusing. A man impersonating a woman could have been terrible, but I think he did a great job. Just the different way he stood, like I said, made such a difference. The clothes, Marlene helping him with what to talk about, how to not find things in your handbag or purse, how to walk in shoes that are painful, all that kind of stuff was kind of made it and cemented a little bit more of the relationship between the two of them, I felt, for me. So in the end, I didn't even bother trying to work out who the Colonel was. And then at the very end, it was pretty much smacked you in the face. But I really didn't see it as an important part of the story because it was, I don't know. There were bits I enjoyed about it, but most of it were a bit of a mess. None of it really seemed to make sense. All the deaths didn't seem to make sense. Maybe apart from Nadine's, because she'd found out who the Colonel was. I found it difficult to see any of the staff at the ballet place, hard to see as anything but slightly incompetent or a distraction or desperate to get ahead in what they're doing. I thought Alice Avriel's reaction to discovering Brigitte was the inspector was she was rather too angry and over the top to be believable. But I did love his boss, the superintendent's reaction, as all the way through when he thought Brigitte was a woman, was constantly trying to want to take him out to dinner and that. So he was obviously very embarrassed and angry, and that was quite funny. But the whole man in the brown suit part wasn't very interesting or compelling for me. This one just does not hit for me. Might do for other people. Please, if you watch it, let us know what you thought. What did you think, Alan?
Yeah, I agree in terms of as a reimagining stuff. It didn't work as well as the Styles one at all. And for me, you just talked about it. This episode really confirmed that the charm of this series is that rather than have somebody play Poirot or even a Poirot avatar like the Japanese one that we watched, it's its own original set of characters. And it's that relationship between them. I think Inspector Swan Lawrence, played by Samuel Labrath. His secretary, Marlene Leroy, played by Elodie Frank. Again, apologies for the pronunciation. And plucky reporter Alice Avril, Blondine Bellevoie. That really makes it work. And I love the banter between them. It's delightful, the way they interact with each other. And I'd add the Superintendent Tricard, Dominique Thomas, and the Coroner Glisson, played by Cyril Gilles, as a solid supporting cast too. The main three and then those additional ones are really cool. But that doesn't really say much about this particular episode. I thought having Laurence go undercover as a somewhat statuesque Brigitte at the ballet, the theatre house, opera house, whatever it was, where this was all set, I thought was good. It could have been farcical and embarrassing, but it worked surprisingly well, allowing for some humour, and especially, as you said, with the superintendent's infatuation with Brigitte. But it was actually also very interesting in that it made a lot of serious observations about the life as a woman in the workplace. And disappointing thing is, that was about the life of the woman in the workplace in the 1960s. And it was equally applicable today.
Yeah.
Maybe not 100%, but close to, which is really sad. But it was interesting that they used this comedy thing to actually address that. And I think, as Marlene said, if every man could dress in high heels and sit in the office for a day, as a woman, life would be very different and they'd appreciate things from a different angle. So I thought, while it was a good, fun show, and at times sort of started to lean towards farce and then came back, it made some very serious social commentary, which I thought was very well done. As for the mystery itself, as you said, I wasn't really invested in that at all. It was too fractured, too many dangling subplots, unnecessary red herrings to make me care about anyone in particular. The titular man in the brown suit was of no real significance. And as you said, we figured out the identity of the colonel just before it was revealed. And it was cool to learn a bit about Laurence and the guy who turned out to be the colonel, and Nadine's time in the French Resistance along the way. I hope in other episodes we learn a bit more about Laurence's backstory and his time during the war and his time as part of the resistance. That could be quite interesting. But yeah, for me, this was very much a character-driven story about social observation, feminism, seeing things from a different point of view. But as a mystery, no, it didn't really work as a mystery at all. I'd say solid middle of the road episode, this one, with a surprise on how well it addressed a very serious topic by using humour.
I would agree with that. And I'd also say the worst thing about that was it had a really high body count, yet none of them were really dealt with in a respectful way. It was, oh, ballerina's dead. Oh, this guy's dead. Oh, this guy's dead. I don't think they dealt with the deaths in a respectful way. And that tends to color things for me, because whoever gets killed should have the respect, what they're there for. He's a policeman. He's meant to be working that out. And the social commentary on women in the workplace was brilliant. But I did feel that part, they really let themselves down because they got too wrapped up in that. And you had at least 5 people killed. Some of them you didn't really even know their names.
Yeah, like the concierge who was basically run down. You didn't know him at all.
No, I was quite shocked by that. We'll move on to the next one, the last one, Murder at the Vicarage. Season 2, episode 14 on Kanopy. It is season 2, episode 7. After a young secretary is found dead by hanging, Inspector Laurence quickly determines it was murder intended to look like suicide. Alice Avril goes undercover as the secretary's replacement to help investigate. This was filmed under the title L'Affaire Poirot, although Poirot doesn't sound like a very French name to me. I don't know why. What did you think of this one, Alan?
I was actually going to go back to you saying about the murder victim not being treated with respect. That's exactly what happens at the beginning of this one with the poor secretary who's found hanged. But it's not the police who don't treat her with respect. It's other people.
Or her co-workers, yeah.
Or her co-workers, yeah. We know the bad guy didn't treat her with respect, but her co-workers didn't seem to be that bothered about it either, which seemed really strange. But anyway, first off, the actor who played Alexandre Poirot, Julien Boisselier, I hope that's how it's pronounced. He was wonderfully creepy and obnoxious to the point that he made my skin crawl. I couldn't wait for him to get bumped off. And to be honest, I gave a little cheer when he eventually did, which is brilliant acting. Having said that, we talked about the young lady who was hanged. I'm not sure why they added that murder early on, unless it was just as a way to add another layer to his cruelty and open things up so Avril could step into that role to do her snooping. But other than that, I'm not quite sure why they did that. Again, it seemed an unnecessarily high body count to some extent. I did like the way that Alice Avril snuck her way into the secretary's job by basically turning up for the interview and seeing all the other women sat there waiting to be interviewed and taking her coat off and acting like she already worked there and she was already the secretary and casually dismissed them. I thought that was really good. As with the earlier style story, knowing the basics of the original plot made it obvious who the murderers were, but that actually didn't spoil the enjoyment of watching Inspector Laurent solve the case. I loved it when he had people in his office and they were telling their stories that sort of Marlene in the background was doing all these dramatic over-the-top reactions as she was listening to the interviews. I thought that was highly amusing. She's rapidly becoming my favorite character in the series after just sort of 3 watches. The whole subplot where they had a movie star in it, who I know was based on the unacknowledged first wife plot device in the original novel, I think they could have done without that. It seemed a bit too melodramatic here. Unless it was for, in there so Laurent could bet another attractive suspect. And I did like some of the feedback he got on that when it was obvious what was happening, when people were like, oh, what's it like going to bed with a movie star? Oh, you're allowed to touch her hair, things like that. I thought
Yeah.
some of that stuff was fun, but I don't think it really added to the plot in any way. And I think she was a bit of an unnecessary distraction. So I think it could have been tighter. But again, just the reactions, the relationships between those 3 leads made it. And I think Marlene was definitely the star of this one for me. So, what about you, Jill?
I agree. The guy who played Poirot as a disgustingly creepy abuser, he played it brilliantly. Like you, he made my skin crawl. I couldn't wait till he got murdered. So therefore, he played it well. And so did the people around him that led into why he was like that, is because they were all scared of him. So it was really good. Like you, I did feel the part with the secretary being murdered wasn't given the space such a death should have been given, as she seemed to have been forgotten a fair bit, even by the police, to be honest. That when all the staff walked in and she's hanging there and they're all like, oh, and they just took her down and laid her on a sofa, put a coat over her. There was no screaming, which was kind of made a nice change. But at the same time, it was quite shocking. Maybe it was written to be that because they were all like, well, I don't really care about that. But as you said, it did give Alice a chance to replace her as a secretary and learn what she could. And as you said, the way she sent all the other applicants away was nothing short of genius. To have the chutzpah to do that was great. It was fun. It was also good to see her that she actually stood up to Poirot, but she definitely felt unsettled by him. And he was obviously fascinated and was going to enjoy the game with her because she was a bit more feisty than his previous secretary. I thought the whole thing with Damien was rather odd. They never did end up with an explanation of where he was the night either of the victims were murdered. We saw him treat the secretary who was fiancé rather poorly, and then he attacked that other guy. So he's obviously not a stable guy. The background of him and Alice being at an orphanage together and the little song they had, that was very sweet, but it didn't stop her realizing that basically he was a creep. Have no idea why he proposed to Alice like that. It was very odd. And he really didn't fit in the story as a whole like the rest did. It was almost like they'd had this idea and they were going to use it whether it worked or not. And as we've both said, the best part of these shows is the relationship between the continuing characters. And Marlene was just brilliant with her reactions in this one. And the overacting that the actress did while she was doing the screen test, and then walking out when she realized, when she was doing the screen test and then recording an advert for a photocopier, that she walked out when she realized they were actually making fun of secretaries in general, and so by association of her, and she was brave enough to just walk away. I thought, again, that was another commentary on women in the workplace, that all those people that were doing the ads thought they were better than silly little secretaries. All they had to do was push a button. I thought that was very good. The movie star stuff with the inspector was really cringy to watch, I thought. But I did love how Marlene stood firm on impersonating her so that she could stay with the inspector. And she was like, give me your mink, I'm down. You don't give me your mink, I'm not doing it. I thought that was really great, how she did that. Because she wouldn't help her because she'd been rude. She'd pushed Marlene when she tried to see her at the hotel. And she'd seen the nasty side of her as a movie star. So she didn't have her up on that pedestal anymore, which was kind of sad in a way for Marlene, not for the movie star. One question I had was, why didn't Lise, who was the daughter of Poirot and the movie star, look anything like either like her mother or father? I thought that was really weird. She acted her part quite well, I thought, though. Maybe it was because of that. The solution, while we already knew it, was done well. And this was definitely the first time in any adaptation for this story I felt like the wife had enough gumption to pull the trigger and kill her husband. She was the only one. She had a definite character and she was desperate, and it showed. And I thought that was very good. I also thought when you were talking about how the superintendent mixes in with them and how funny they are, him and Marlene recreating one of the scenes from the movie star's movies was also quite funny and sweet at the same time. I thought that added a little, how they were all excited about the movie star. Yeah, I thought it was a solid story. Well done. Again, well acted. But I thought that the murdered secretary really got sidelined by everybody in this one, not just her co-workers, but by the police as well. But I did an interior cheer when Poirot was killed. I didn't do an exterior cheer like Alan did. I just did a little interior. Finally, we can get on with the story and get this creepy dude out of the way.
Boy, was he creepy, as we both said.
Yeah, he was. He was. So, it was really well done.
I also got fascinated by the door in his office, which was basically seemed to be a pane of glass with no surrounder in it. And I don't know why. Every time somebody went in and out of that office, I was looking at the door to see how it worked.
How you were? I was like wondering, it's the door.
Anyway, 1960s French architectural aesthetic, apparently I find more fascinating than I knew. We'd like to close out this one with an email from a listener. So thank you, Jo Strong, for reaching out. And she answered a question that Jill asked in an earlier episode where we were wondering why the initial short story episodes were in such an odd order. Jo basically sent us a note that said, I thought I'd seen or heard the reason for this somewhere. So my understanding was that due to Rosalind Hicks, Agatha's daughter, being very protective of her mother's work, that these were a selection of short stories that she was prepared to allow to be filmed for the beginning of the Poirot series, because of course at this point no one knew what a success it would be. These were short stories that had appeared in magazines in the 1920s and 30s, and a few collected later in Agatha Christie's career. So she selected a long list, and from that selection, covering various themes, theft, death, kidnapping, etc., some were chosen for filming. Great information. Thanks, Jo. Very interesting. I hadn't actually really thought about the fact that, of course, when they were starting the series, they didn't know if it was going to be a success, so they probably didn't want to put in the effort to do 90-minute movie-length adaptations of the novels, and selecting odd short stories would probably be the best way to test to see if there was an audience for the show. So that all makes sense. What do you think, Jill? It was your question. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, it does, actually. It does. I knew that Rosalind Hicks was very protective of her mother's work because she knew how unhappy her mother had been with some of the adaptations. So she really kept a tight rein what was allowed to be adapted. That hadn't really popped in my head. So thanks, Jo, very much for reminding us about that. Really appreciate it. Please join us for our next regular episode where we'll be discussing the mysterious Mr. Quinn. We look forward to you joining us.
The music used in this episode was extracted from I'm Somebody, Somebody Now by the Joe Venuti Orchestra and is a public domain recording. The Chronological Christie podcast is a production of Megrin Entertainment, a division of 4J's Group, LLC.